The air in the back of house was thick enough to drink, a humid cocktail of searing steak, garlic, and the metallic tang of the industrial dishwasher. Annalise leaned against a stainless steel counter, the cool metal a temporary balm against the heat radiating from her skin. It was her fourth double shift this week, a soul-crushing marathon of polite smiles and aching arches. Fatigue was a constant companion, a low hum beneath the surface of her thoughts, making the world feel distant and slightly unreal. Through the swinging doors, the dining room was an ocean of murmuring voices and the gentle clinking of silver on porcelain, a world away from the steamy, chaotic engine room. She closed her eyes for a beat, just one, imagining the bliss of peeling off her uniform, the starched white shirt, the tight red vest, the ridiculous black bow tie that always felt like it was gently trying to strangle her. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Gerald, poked his head through the doors. "Table 7 needs you, Annalise." "He's here," he didn't need to say the name. Everyone knew who he was. Kong Jin, the man who arrived twice a week in a silent black sedan, took the most secluded booth in the back and sat there for precisely 2 hours, speaking to no one. The other servers were terrified of him, spinning tales of his connections to the city's underbelly, calling him a powerful Korean Mafia boss in hushed, dramatic whispers. They saw a monster. Annalise, in her bone-deep exhaustion, just saw a customer who tipped in crisp $100 bills and never complained. She pushed off the counter, straightened her vest, and forced the professional mask back onto her face. The walk to table 7 felt longer tonight. He was already there, a statue carved from shadows and expensive tailoring. His suit was a dark charcoal, his hair black with startling threads of silver at the temples. He didn't look up as she approached, his attention fixed on the condensation tracing a path down his glass of water. Annalise placed a small plate of bread and butter on the table, her movements economical and practiced. "Good evening, Mr. Kong. Can I get you your usual to start?" Her voice was level, a stark contrast to the nervous energy that rippled through the staff whenever he was present. He didn't respond for a long moment. He simply watched the bread, as if contemplating its existence. Then, without looking at her, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was their entire exchange. For weeks it had been like this. Nods, a pointed finger at a menu item, the quiet slide of a credit card at the end of the meal. He was a ghost who paid exceptionally well. As she turned to leave, her foot caught on the leg of an empty chair someone had failed to push in. Her fatigue, which had been a low hum, suddenly surged, throwing her balance into chaos. The silver tray of water glasses she was carrying for another table tilted, a slow-motion disaster. Ice and water cascaded onto the polished floor, the glasses shattering with a sound that felt obscenely loud in the hushed dining room. The crash echoed, and for a second, every conversation stopped. A collective intake of breath. Mortification, hot and sharp, flooded Annalise's cheeks. She had just created a scene at the table of the most feared man in the city. She braced herself for a cold dismissal, for a quiet word to her manager that would end her employment. Instead, there was only silence from the booth. When she finally dared to look up from the glittering wreckage, Kong Jin was looking directly at her. For the first time, his eyes were not angry. They were dark, analytical, and filled with a stillness that was more unnerving than any rage. He was simply watching her, as if she were a puzzle he was slowly piecing together. He finally spoke, his voice a low baritone, smooth and quiet. "Are you all right?" The question, so mundane, so human, was the last thing she ever expected to hear from him. Her own voice came out shaky, a betrayal of the calm she projected.
"I've fine.
I am so sorry, sir. I'll have this cleaned up immediately." She knelt, fumbling with the larger shards of glass, her hands trembling slightly. Another server rushed over with a dustpan, their eyes wide with a mixture of pity and fear. Gerald was already hovering, his face pale. But Jean held up a hand, a gesture that stopped everyone in their tracks. He was still looking at Annalise. "What is your name?" he asked, the question cutting through the residual tension. She looked up from the floor, meeting his gaze again. The intensity there held her captive. It wasn't threatening, but it was absolute. "Annalise," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He gave another one of his slow, deliberate nods. "Annalise," he repeated, as if tasting the word. He then turned his gaze to Gerald. "From now on, only she will serve my table." It wasn't a request. It was a decree. Gerald stammered an immediate agreement, practically bowing. Annalise just knelt there, surrounded by shattered glass and spilled water, feeling as though the floor had just dropped out from under her. She had stumbled, quite literally, into the orbit of a man everyone else knew to avoid, and she had no idea what that meant. The arrangement became a strange, silent ritual. Every Tuesday and Friday, he would arrive at 7 o'clock sharp. Annalise would have his table ready, a glass of iced water waiting. She would take his order. Always the same, steak, rare, with a side of steamed asparagus, and he would eat in complete silence, his focus absolute. He never read, never looked at a phone. He just existed in his booth, a pocket of profound stillness in the bustling restaurant. Annalise became an expert in his silence. She learned the subtle shift in his posture that meant he was finished, the slight downturn of his lips that signaled he did not care for the wine pairing Gerald had suggested. She moved around him with a quiet efficiency that he seemed to appreciate, a silent dance they performed twice a week. Her coworker, Sarah, thought she was insane. "I don't get how you do it," Sarah would say, polishing wine glasses behind the bar. "He looks at me, and I feel like my soul is being audited." "He is a genuine Korean Mafia boss, Annalise, not just some quiet businessman," Annalise would just shrug. "He's a good tipper, and he doesn't make a mess." It was her shield, that pragmatism. The truth was more complicated. She was no longer just tired when she served him. She was aware, acutely aware. She noticed the fine, almost invisible scar that traced the line of his left eyebrow. She noticed the way his long fingers would rest on his water glass, never tapping, never fidgeting. He wore a simple, elegant watch with a dark leather band, its face unadorned. She started to feel a strange sense of protectiveness over his quiet. When other diners would stare too long or whisper too loudly, she would find a reason to intervene, offering them more bread or refilling their water, drawing their attention away. She was becoming the guardian of his solitude. She was also becoming incredibly curious. Who was this man who commanded such fear with nothing but his presence? What did he think about during those long, silent hours? She found herself constructing a life for him in her head, a narrative to fill the void he presented. It was a dangerous game, humanizing a man everyone else saw as a predator. She knew it was reckless. But in the lonely landscape of her own life, a life defined by exhaustion and student debt, his silent, consistent presence had become a strange, unmovable landmark, a fixed point in her chaotic world. And a part of her, a part she refused to acknowledge, was beginning to look forward to Tuesdays and Fridays with an unsettling anticipation. She was no longer just serving a customer. She was observing an enigma, and the enigma was starting to feel disturbingly familiar. From Jin's perspective, the restaurant was an exercise in control. It was neutral territory, a place of clean lines and predictable etiquette where business could be conducted without the grime of his other world sticking to the upholstery. He chose it for its anonymity, for the way the wealthy patrons were too absorbed in their own lives to notice the quiet man in the corner. He had cultivated an aura of untouchability, a silence so profound it acted as a better deterrent than any bodyguard. People feared what they could not understand, and no one understood him. He preferred it that way. Then came the girl with the tired eyes and the steady hands. Annalise. He had noticed her before the incident with the water glasses. He noticed everything. He saw the way she moved with an efficiency that bordered on grace, even when her shoulders sagged with fatigue. He saw the way she treated every customer with the same detached professionalism, whether they were a fawning millionaire or a complaining tourist. She was a constant, a reliable variable in a world filled with betrayal and shifting allegiances. When she fell, for a single, chaotic moment, the sterile predictability of the room had fractured. He had expected her to dissolve into tears or babble apologies. He had expected fear. He did not expect her to meet his gaze with mortified defiance. He did not expect her to simply get to work cleaning up her own mess. In her apology, there was no groveling. In her eyes, there was no terror. There was embarrassment, yes, but beneath it, there was a core of resilience he recognized instantly. It was the same quality he valued in his most trusted men. The quality of being unbreakable. His decision to make her his sole server was an impulse, and he was not a man given to impulse. It was illogical. It drew attention to him, to her. It created a connection, and connections were liabilities. Yet he could not help himself. He wanted to observe her more closely. He wanted to understand this anomaly who looked at him and saw not a powerful Korean Mafia boss, but a man who needed his steak cooked rare. One Tuesday night, the air in the restaurant felt different. It was heavier, charged with an unseen current. Annalise felt it the moment she walked onto the floor. It wasn't just the usual tension that accompanied Jin's presence. It was something sharper, more specific. Jin himself seemed different, too. His usual stillness was there, but it was coiled, like a spring tightened to its breaking point. His eyes, normally fixed on his plate or the space just beyond it, now scanned the room with a slow, methodical sweep. Annalise's senses went on high alert, a primal instinct cutting through her fatigue. She noticed two men sitting at a table near the bar, a table that gave them a clear line of sight to Jin's booth. They didn't belong. It wasn't just their ill-fitting suits or the way they nursed their drinks without actually drinking them. It was their quiet conversation. Annalise had spent 2 years of her university life studying linguistics, focusing on East Asian languages, and had spent a semester abroad in Tokyo. She was fluent in Japanese, a skill she listed on resumes that mostly got her jobs pouring coffee. As she passed their table, pretending to check on the salt shaker, she caught a few words of their low, guttural Japanese. The dialect was rough, not the polite speech of businessmen. She heard kitchen exit, 5 minutes, and a word that made the blood freeze in her veins. Pistol, her mind raced, connecting the dots with terrifying speed. These men were not here for dinner. They were here for Jean. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her training, her instinct, everything screamed at her to walk away. Call in sick. Disappear into the kitchen and let whatever was going to happen, happen. This was not her world. This was not her fight. He was a mafia boss. Violence was his language. But then she pictured his face, his unnervingly calm eyes, the quiet way he ate his meals alone. She had spent weeks watching him, and in that time, she had seen not a monster, but a man shrouded in a profound and impenetrable loneliness. The choice crystallized in her mind, sharp and clear. She couldn't do it. She couldn't just stand by and watch someone be executed, no matter who they were. Her moral compass, the one thing she truly owned in this world, wouldn't allow it. It was reckless. It was stupid. It was suicide. But it was the only thing she could do. Her movements became a study in forced calm. She walked to the service station, her hands steady despite the tremor running through her body. She poured a fresh glass of water, the ice cubes clinking softly. Walking towards Jin's table felt like wading through deep water. The two men at the bar watched her, their eyes cold and dismissive. They saw a waitress, an insignificant part of the scenery. She reached the booth, placing the glass down beside his plate. He didn't look up. She leaned in, her voice a low, urgent whisper, her mouth close to his ear as if she were pointing out a special on the menu. She spoke in the same language as the assassins, a flawless, unaccented Japanese. They have a gun. The kitchen exit. In 5 minutes, for a fraction of a second, nothing happened. He remained perfectly still. Then, his eyes lifted and met hers. The placid, analytical calm was gone. In its place was a flash of something she had never seen before. Shock.
Pure, unadulterated astonishment.
It was there, and then gone, replaced by an alertness so sharp it was almost a physical force. He didn't question her. He didn't hesitate. He simply absorbed the information and processed it. The trust he gave her in that split second was absolute. He blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion that was his only acknowledgement. Then he moved. It was a fluid, economical motion. He stood, not with the haste of a man fleeing, but with the purpose of a man taking control. He reached into his jacket, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a slim leather wallet. From it, he extracted a single, stark black business card and placed it face down on the table. He looked at her one last time, his gaze holding a new, unreadable depth. Then he turned and walked, not toward the kitchen exit, but toward the main entrance, moving with a calm, unhurried pace that defied the imminent threat. He disappeared through the revolving doors, just as Annalise heard a commotion from the back of the restaurant. A clatter of dropped pans, a sharp, muffled shout. The two men from the bar were suddenly on their feet, their faces masks of fury and confusion. They exchanged a panicked look and bolted for the same kitchen exit they had planned to use as a trap. Annalise stood frozen by the empty booth, her breath caught in her throat. The restaurant patrons were beginning to murmur, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, but understanding none of it. A siren wailed in the distant city, growing faintly louder. She looked down at the table. The black card lay there, a small rectangle of shadow on the white linen. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. She turned it over. There was no company name, no title. Just a name, Kong Jin, and a string of numbers. It felt heavy in her palm, like a key to a door she never should have opened. Her manager was rushing toward her, his face a mess of panic and questions, but she couldn't hear him. All she could hear was the frantic beating of her own heart and the echo of a silent man's astonishment. She had stepped out of her world and into his, and she had a terrifying feeling that there was no going back. The next few days were a blur of nervous energy. Annalise went to work, smiled at customers, and poured wine with hands that she prayed looked steady. But every time the restaurant door opened, her stomach clenched. Every black car that drove past her bus stop made her flinch. She kept the card tucked into the pocket of her jeans, a constant, weighty reminder of the line she had crossed. She didn't call the number. What would she even say? "Hi, it's the waitress who saved you from an assassination attempt. You're welcome?" The absurdity of it was laughable and terrifying. Sarah tried to get it out of her. What happened the other night? Jean just vanished, and those two creeps ran out the back. Gerald is freaking out. Annalise just shook her head, pleading exhaustion. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't give voice to the fact that she had willingly entangled herself in the affairs of a man the entire city considered a dangerous criminal. The silence stretched for a week. He didn't come back to the restaurant on his scheduled days. A part of her was relieved. Maybe he had understood. She had helped him, and now they would both go back to their separate lives. The debt was paid. But another, deeper part of her felt a hollow ache, a strange sense of absence. The silence in the restaurant was just silence now, no longer charged with his presence. It felt empty. Then, one night, as she was walking the 3 blocks from the bus stop to her small apartment building, a black sedan pulled up silently beside her. The back window glided down, revealing Kong Jin sitting in the shadows of the interior. Her heart leaped into her throat. He didn't look threatening. He just looked tired, the hard lines of his face softened by the dim streetlights. "Get in, Annalise," he said. It was not a command, but a quiet, almost weary request. She hesitated for only a moment before opening the door and sliding onto the cool leather seat. The car was silent, insulated from the city's noise. It smelled of leather and something clean like rain. He didn't speak right away. He just watched her, his dark eyes searching her face. Finally, he broke the silence. "Why?" he asked, his voice low. "Why did you do it?" It was the same question that had been haunting her. She could have given a simple answer. It was the right thing to do. But looking at him now, at the genuine confusion in his expression, she knew he deserved more. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice more honest than it had been in years. I could not. It didn't matter who you were. I couldn't watch that happen." His expression shifted, the hard mask of the infamous Korean Mafia boss cracking for a moment. He looked away from her, out the window at the passing city lights. When he looked back, his eyes held a raw vulnerability that stunned her. No one has ever done something for me without wanting something in return, he said, his voice barely audible. My entire life has been a series of transactions. Loyalty is bought. Fear is leveraged. Love is a weakness to be exploited. He leaned forward slightly, the space between them shrinking. But you knew nothing about me, except the stories people whisper. And you risked your life for a man you should have feared. He paused, and the silence that followed was heavier than any they had shared in the restaurant. For weeks, I have watched you, he continued, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. You move through this world, tired and unseen, yet you are more present than anyone I have ever known. You see things other people miss. You saw me, the confession hung in the air, a fragile, impossible thing. This powerful, dangerous man was laying his soul bare in the back of a car on a quiet street. I did not know what it was, this feeling, he said, to have someone see past the monster. But I know now. I cannot go back to the silence before you. I cannot let you go back to a life where you are not safe. His gaze was intense, unwavering. This is not a request, Annalise. It is a promise. You will be with me. You will be safe. You will be my wife. The words should have terrified her. They were possessive, absolute. But woven through them was a thread of desperate, profound sincerity. It wasn't the declaration of a tyrant claiming a prize. It was the plea of a drowning man reaching for the only solid thing he had ever found. Annalise sat in the silent, luxurious car, the city lights painting fleeting patterns across Kong Jin's face. His declaration, "You will be my wife," echoed in the enclosed space, a statement of such impossible gravity it seemed to suck all the air from her lungs. This was the moment her life pivoted on a single, terrifying axis. Her mind, usually so quick and analytical, was a storm of conflicting thoughts. There was the life she knew, the relentless exhaustion, the mountain of student debt, the lonely apartment that never quite felt like home. It was a hard life, but it was hers. It was predictable, safe, in its own mundane way. And then there was the life he was offering. A world of shadows and violence, of unspoken rules and unimaginable wealth. A world where danger was a constant companion. To step into it would be to lose herself entirely, to become a possession of the city's most powerful Korean Mafia boss. Yet, looking at him, she didn't see the monster from the whispers. She saw the man who had looked at her with astonishment when she'd warned him. She saw the profound loneliness in his eyes, a loneliness that mirrored her own. He wasn't offering her a fairy tale. He was offering her his reality, his protection, his entire broken, complicated self. He was offering her a place beside him, not behind him. It was a choice between a predictable emptiness and a terrifying, vibrant unknown. She thought of Sarah's warnings, of Gerald's fear, of the common sense that screamed at her to run. But she also remembered the strange sense of purpose she felt in his presence, the way his stillness calmed the chaos in her own mind. He was the first person who had ever truly seen her. He saw her competence, her resilience, her quiet strength. In his world, those weren't the traits of a good waitress. They were the traits of a survivor, a queen. A slow breath escaped her lips. She met his intense gaze, her own resolve hardening into a clear, sharp point. This was not about love, not yet. It was about recognition. It was about choosing to step into a story that was bigger, more dangerous, and infinitely more real than the one she had been living. "Okay," she said. The word was small, quiet, but it landed in the silence of the car with the force of a vow. A flicker of relief, so profound it was almost painful, crossed his features. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. His touch was not rough or demanding. It was firm, warm, and absolute. It was the touch of a man who had just found his anchor in a raging sea.